This is a reading from Akita, the Tears and Message of Mary. Love of the neighbor. On Monday, February 25th, the guardian angel appeared during the evening rosary at the beginning of the third decade. She murmured to Sister Agnes, "At this moment, one of the sisters is tormented by something. Take from her an object she wears and wear it in her place until the first Friday of the month. On that day, I will give you the answer she needs." Then the angel disappeared. Discreetly, Sister Agnes went to the kitchen and approached the sister who was taking care of the stove, and without giving much thought as to what she should choose, she noticed the medal which her friend was wearing around the neck. She undid the chain, saying, "Lend it to me for a little, and I will explain to you afterwards." Sister Agnes put the medal around her own neck and returned to the saying of the rosary. It all happened so quickly that she herself was surprised. However, something even more surprising then followed. When she tried to take up the prayer, she found that her mind was elsewhere, and that she was incapable of doing it. She had to reason with herself that you are before the Lord, you must pray with all your heart, but she could no longer concentrate at all. Her thought was scattered, her heart was filled with ideas without relation, which came and went like clouds in the sky. For the first time in her life, she understood the meaning of not being able to pray. Her companion had spoken to her before of difficulties that she experienced because of distractions, but she did not understand it and always asked the reason. What does it mean to be distracted? Sister Agnes had asked of the others. She finally understood that it was not given to everyone to be able to completely be absorbed in prayer, each one being more or less subject to caprices of thought. She had been careful not to insist in order not to give the impression that she seemed to have received an exceptional grace. However, she had indeed received this rare privilege, namely the faculty of praying in a spirit of total abandonment and total simplicity of heart. From her infancy, she had shown a special aptitude for concentration. She absorbed herself totally in what she undertook. This natural disposition made it possible for her to enter without difficulty into a life of prayer when she embraced the Catholic faith. When one asks her how she prays, her answer is of a disconcerting naivete. She explains that she quite simply follows the counsel of the priest who prepared her for baptism. To pray is to speak with God, and nothing more. When one asks her if she is not troubled that the one to whom she is speaking does not answer, she said that is no problem because anyway, she was always the dear child of her father, and consequently she speaks to God as if speaking to her father. For Mary, it is the same. She speaks to her in the same way as to her mother. Such are her answers, given with a disarming naturalness. Does not the evangelical recommendation, like little children, refer to this fundamental attitude of the heart? And when one tries to know if other thoughts do not come to trouble her prayer, Sister Agnes answers with a troubled air, "How can one think of anything else when one is before God and speaking to Him?" Thus, in prayer said aloud, it is enough to think of the sense of each word. Finally, she sees before her the faces of all the people whom she carries in her intentions, with just enough time to stop on each one in particular. So, how would she have time to think of anything else? Furthermore, Sister Agnes seems to believe that this is evident for everyone. Thus, this new experience astonishes her so much the more because she had not the slightest idea of the difficulties one can experience in prayer. Suddenly, her thoughts begin to wander from right to left, and everything around her begins to bother her. Until then, expressions which express embarrassment and affectation, such as to put on airs, to show off, were for her only words. For the first time in her life, she understands what they mean in reality. Now she realized what it was to be in this insipid and heavy state. Moved by a profound compassion, she nevertheless forced herself to pray that her companion might be liberated. During this time, her companion from the kitchen shone with a radiant enthusiasm. Never in her life had she succeeded in praying so easily. 2 days after this began was Ash Wednesday, the 27th of February, a day of fast and abstinence. Sister Agnes knew through the Gospels that prayer and fasting were efficacious to dissipate this kind of torment. On that day, she deprived herself more than the others to obtain the requested grace, giving the impression that it was because of the state of her stomach. She did not take a drop of water the whole day. She repeated, without stopping, unable to do more because of the state in which she found herself. "Lord, have pity," and begged Mary without being able to find words other than, "Help me." That evening, the Way of the Cross began at 7:30. She followed this sorrowful spiritual exercise to the end, doing violence to her somber and recalcitrant humor. But hardly was the service over when she felt in herself a ray of light piercing through the darkness. Somewhere a flame had been lit and comforted her with its warmth. As though returned to herself, she found that she had regained her habitual disposition. The following morning she welcomed the day with the same interior peace. For her part, her companion from the kitchen seemed closed within herself and spoke to no one, to such a point that she finished by going into her room for the rest of the day. Now Sister Agnes knew what it was to have such a suffering, having had the same experience. She went often to console and encourage her friend with the words of one who had known the same lot. "We will offer all our weaknesses and our miseries to Mary and ask her help." She continued discreetly, to the degree that was possible, to fast and to pray. The first Friday of the month of March came, day of the angel's promise. That morning her friend hastened to greet her, and with a radiant face exclaimed, "Thank you for your prayers." She confided to her to have really felt the effects, but nonetheless, Sister Agnes did not relax in her effort. That evening, when the two sisters were alone in the chapel after the Way of the Cross, the guardian angel appeared to Sister Agnes and gave her this exhortation, which she felt was addressed to her friend: "Believe, trust, pray." She repeated it to her friend, word for word. "I believe, I trust, I pray," repeated the other. Then the angel disappeared. Footnote: this is similar to the prayer taught by the angel to the children of Fatima. "My God, I believe, I adore, I trust, and I love thee. I beg pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not trust, and do not love thee." Immediately, Sister Agnes noticed that she was holding in her hand the medal she had borrowed, and gave it back. The latter put it around her neck and went and knelt before the statue of Our Lady, saying aloud, "Holy Mary, I believe, I trust, I pray." If this religious had not been delivered immediately from the cross which she had been given to carry, she had received the confidence and the hope of being able one day to overcome her trial. This episode, which ought not to surprise us, concerns the interior world in its most pure expression. At first sight, one would be tempted to see simply a beautiful story between two friends, one of whom frees the other from a burden by sharing her sufferings through prayer and fast. Indeed, this experience was as fruitful for Sister Agnes herself. These three words, faith, hope, and love, give her the measure of the trials which are going to mark her road, and they create in her the necessary dispositions to overcome them. The current fashion, spread even among religious, tends to consider all that carries the name of God as an object of intellectual investigation, and not as a being to whom one gives confidence. In the Catholic Church, one hears again and again that theological matters are evaluated and researched with intellectual delight. However, when one stops at believing only what one has understood, at the end of a research, can one speak of a deepening of the faith? Has one not merely rested on the level of acquisitions of human intelligence? No matter what one does, human resources alone are always powerless to sound the immeasurable depths of the divine mystery. The only way to progress at all is to have recourse to the grace of faith, which is a gift of God. One often hears it said, "Without previous knowledge, one cannot pray to God or confide to his providence." This is to rely on one's own ideas and to count only on one's own strength. It is hardly possible in these conditions to have a taste for prayer to him who is radically different, God in his ineffable mystery. The world we see is full of marvels which far surpass our human capacity of knowledge and comprehension. As for the spiritual world, which we do not see, the feeble light of our intelligence is of little help. It is only by the light of faith that we can hope to penetrate in some small way the depths of the infinite mystery. For those who put intellectual knowledge above all, the tribulations of a soul in search of God taken upon herself by a compassionate sister will appear like something of little consequence. But it is a profound act of charity. The effective participation of Sister Agnes in the moral sufferings of her friend, on the invitation of the angel, is a very concrete example of love for one's neighbor. In our days, This kind of love is hardly taken into consideration, but it is necessary to remember that the saints who have marked the history of the Church were men and women who never recoiled before suffering out of love for their neighbor. Inversely, when one is consecrated only to preaching while remaining in delicate comfort, one has little chance of seeing that preaching bear fruit. What the angel teaches us through this experience of Sister Agnes is certainly not visible to the eyes. It is nonetheless an exemplary application of the commandment of Jesus. Today, love for one's neighbor has a tendency of being considered only as a material act consisting of giving and receiving to the degree that one's pocketbook does not suffer too much. Is this sufficient indeed to please the Lord? The teaching of Christ is not easy. What merit have you for loving those who love you? When you salute only your brothers, where is your merit? In this trial, the exhortation of the angel to believe, confide, and to pray is a precious encouragement for Sister Agnes herself, more than for anyone else in the numerous difficulties she was soon going to have to face when the message of Our Lady would be made public. She was to be submitted to test after test, repeated interrogations, disbelief, and worse. In all this, the encouragement of the angel to believe, trust, and to pray will be a consolation. All her trials to this date were preparing her to bear a much greater burden. All the events that I have recorded up to this time had taken place in the year which preceded my arrival, beginning in January 1973, when Sister Agnes was struck with total deafness. Not having been a personal witness during those previous years, I have had to rely on the intimate journal of Sister Agnes, filled out and explained in detail in my direct communications with her and with the members of the community. Now I too became a witness. The 10th of March, 1974. It was on the 10th of March, 1974, when I decided to take a leave of absence from public preaching and to take up residence in the presbytery of the Sisters of Yuzawadai, at that time a hamlet unknown to the world and buried under snow. I have already told you of the unusual circumstances which led me to this isolated convent and made me, however unworthy, a part of the extraordinary events which surround the presentation to the world of a message of stunning importance. What I learned and what I personally witnessed concerning the statue of Our Lady and her message to the world was completely beyond anything I had foreseen. From this point forward, I will be recounting the facts as I personally lived and observed them. In my younger years, I wanted to be a priest because I wished to preach the Word of God. And having realized my wish by the grace of God, I thought only of consecrating the rest of my days to this task, without ever in the world thinking that I would come to dwell in this convent, lost in the northwest mountains of Japan. It is always with emotion that I recall the unusual circumstances of divine providence which led me to this place, an invisible thread of providence drawing me through the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Translator's note. It was proposed to Bishop Ito that the first major book in English about Akita should be based on the writings of Father Yasuda, that is, this present book, on the book by Father Shimura, who was vice-rector of the cathedral in Tokyo and spiritual director of the Blue Army there, and in a special way on the intimate relationship between the events and message of Akita and the events and messages of Fatima. However, Bishop Ito directed that first of all this book of Father Yasuda should be translated and made available in English in its entirety, and this is because it seems apparent that Our Lady herself prepared and chose this exceptional priest to go to the convent at Yuzawadai at precisely the time he did so, that he could closely study the event as the confessor and spiritual director of the community, become the confidant of Sister Agnes and the right hand of the bishop in evaluating and reacting to this most important supernatural intervention, so important not only to Japan, but to the entire world. As remarked in a previous footnote, rarely has any important private revelation been the object of such prudent, discreet, and accurate, immediate reporting. One can recall the role of Blessed Claude de la Colombière in the apparitions of the Sacred Heart to Saint Margaret Mary, the records of Our Lady of Pont-Main by Abbé Richard, or the role of the Canon Formigao in the apparitions of Fatima. None exceed in importance the role of Father Yasuda in the events of Akita. He now continues. And there's a picture of Sister Agnes greeting a group of U.S. pilgrims